Jess Haskins. I'm co-chair of IGDA NYC, and we are very excited to bring you here together today to talk about unions in the game industry. So we are co-hosting with our friends at Writers Guild of America East. I'll be bringing Justin on to give you the welcome from them in just a moment here. I wanted to start with some ground rules for the evening today. This is a kind of sensitive topic. We want everyone in the room to feel safe, to have their privacy respected. So please do not post any pictures of the room, people in the room, or publicly identify anyone who might be in attendance, excepting the named people up here on the stage, of course. We'll also be posting some notes about the event afterward, just anonymized. Excuse me. So, if you share stories about a company or a person or something, just try and keep it, general, big company X or small studio, because we don't need to name names or the details. So, So at a certain point, we're going to be bringing a panel up and asking them a few questions. We have a great guest panel assembled, and then we're going to turn the cameras off and have a closed room discussion, roundtable style. That's when you'll be invited to come up and share your questions. Well, not come up, but within the room in a closed private discussion. So let's see what else. Basically, I wanted to say why we're having this event is because unions and unionization have become a kind of big topic in the game industry, and we wanted to facilitate that conversation. You may have been aware of there was a roundtable at GDC this year that kind of kicked off a lot of the discussion, and since then, IGDA chapters, Chicago in particular had a really good one, have been having roundtables and continuing this discussion. So we're here to sort of provide the space for that. It's a topic that we, the leadership of the chapter, care about, and that we believe that our members care about. And so as long as that continues to be the case, we will continue to have those discussions. So without further ado, I think we'll bring up Justin Melito from WGAE, who will tell you a little bit about their organization and sort of Unions 101, because we feel like having some grounding is kind of helpful in this discussion, since we don't have a lot of experience with organized labor in the game industry. So please welcome Justin Melito.
Great, thank you. Starting in that classic way, aren't I? Okay, so welcome to the Writers Guild of America East. For those of you who are not familiar with the Writers Guild of America East, just give you a quick background. We're about 4,800 and growing. Creative professionals, mostly writers in the film and television and news industry. Most recently in digital media, we've had several campaigns to help digital media workers become part of the union as well. The Guild was started way back in the 30s when a lot of unions were started, when the political environment sort of matched our current political environment in terms of workers' rights being under attack and people not having ways in which to collectively push back and advocate as individuals. And so the Screenwriter, hold it closer, okay. So the Screenwriters Guild started way back then. As technology has changed and platforms have changed, the Writers Guild as a union have changed with the technology. And so there's been radio writers as part of the union. There's been television when it came about, writers joined as part of the union. And just a show of hands, are people here familiar with the strike in 2008? So the Writers Guild went on strike in 2008 for the right of writers to have the same rights that they have in film and television on the internet and on other platforms. And so the union essentially is a way for people to take collective action to make improvements and improve standards. Often that's done through a collective bargaining agreement, and at other times that's done through collective action. And so a strike is one collective action that helped the Writers Guild get writers who were writing for the internet. And this was before, you know, Netflix and streaming was a big deal at all, but the writers of the union thought it was important to establish jurisdiction in that place, and that strike really became the beginning of our current campaigns in digital media. And, you know, recognizing that as technology and platforms change, the institution changes as well. One just quick Union 101 thing is essentially it's a group of people who come together to make changes within an industry or within a particular company. Changes being improvements oftentimes, so whether it's health insurance, long hours without extra compensation, addressing issues of diversity at the workplace, addressing things like not having retirement security. Essentially, the group of people find a community of interest within an industry or within a company and work collectively to make improvements there. And so our union is an institution that helps people in particular industries, in this case, the media industry, come together to make those improvements. So we'll get into like exactly how that happens and how that has happened in several places most recently as we go through. But we also see this, it's a little warm in here too, isn't it? Sorry about that. I don't know if it's probably too late to turn the air conditioner. There's a whole thing about turning the air conditioning on. I apologize. But hopefully maybe they can do it. So what was I saying? So I should wrap it up here in terms of the introduction. But we see that this office and our union is a place for creatives to come together and talk about how to make improvements. So whether you're actually a member of the union or not, as the director of organizing, it's my job to try to help facilitate conversations and facilitate community building in the areas where people may be interested and have a need to make improvements. So we were very excited when the IGDA reached out and said that they would be interested in having a conversation, particularly in the gaming industry, because you know we know what's going on in terms of hearing about the industry a little bit, and that you know there's lots of pressures, and frankly a lot of the stuff that we've heard sounds a lot like a couple of the industries that we've most recently been active in. So we are always open here for you all to come in and meet and have conversations, and we hope to continue the conversation sort of at the pace that you all are interested in. So welcome.
Okay, so we could just switch over to the panelists we have on standby here, joining us via satellite remote. If I could invite the panelists to come up and join me up here.
You are kidding.
And also thank you guys for bearing with us so silently through all of that.
Can they see us?
You too.
Yeah, they can see us right there.
Okay, so we'll start with those joining us from afar here. Katie Watson, first one to my left here, is the National Director of Voiceover for SAG-AFTRA. She oversees the union's interactive agreements and advocates across contract areas for the well-being of voice actors. And during the recent video game strike, she served as point person for members and game developers. And she also worked with her staff to find new employment opportunities for members affected by the strike. Steve Kaplan is joining us as international representative of IATSE. I always say that wrong. Is that the IATSE? And he left the visual effects industry in Los Angeles to become organizer for the IATSE Local 839 Animation Guild. In his efforts there, he helped organize local animation crews at Nickelodeon's CG department at Rick and Morty. He also helped to develop a more robust training program for the local and an internal organizing program that brought a heightened awareness of the need for organizing and value in membership. And in January 2016, he became an international representative with IATSE. works in the motion picture and television department and is primarily responsible for organizing outside the traditional feature and episodic television areas, which means industries like stop motion animation, visual effects, and game development. So, thanks for joining us, Steve.
Glad to be here.
Next, going down to Justin, who you just heard from, who is the Director of Organizing here at WGAE. He's worked to help build power for workers in a wide range of industries and places, and been working as the Director of Organizing at the Writers Guild of America East since 2008, where he's led efforts to organize over 1,500 digital news media employees and hundreds of reality TV workers. We'll be hearing about some of that from Sumit Sarkar, who is the front page editor of Polygon. He's an entertainment journalist and critic who has spent more than a decade covering video games, technology, television, and movies. And he's worked for over 6 years at Polygon, where he's front page editor. And he represents Polygon on the Vox Media Union Bargaining Committee. And last but certainly not least, we have Mohini Dutta from Game Workers Unite. She's a game designer and educator. She works at Antidote, a game design consultancy that she co-founded. And she's an organizer with Game Workers Unite, which is a horizontal worker-led group advocating for game workers' rights and the crafting of a unionized games industry. So we are very grateful to have all of this collective knowledge from many industries here joining us. So please welcome them. So, Katie, I wanted to start with you because I feel like for a lot of the games industry, the recent voice actors strike in 2016 and 2017 was sort of the industry's first major brush with this type of union action. And so can you just please give us a quick rundown of what that was, what happened, and what it was all about?
Sure. I feel like, since this is a mixed crowd, I just want to preface not all unions strike, even though he just referenced the WGA strike earlier. And obviously our strike was a pretty big deal over the past couple of years. So that preface, now let me tell you about our strike. We started this action post-merger. So after previously Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA, which were two separate actor and performer unions, merged in 2012. The video game industry was really a contract that we identified as an area that we could organize and improve upon. And so our organizing department did a great job of outreach and really trying to investigate what the issues that were important to our members were. And going into that negotiation, it became clear that our main fighting points were a contingent compensation or residual structure, which is something that our members are used to under our other contracts. We discovered that our members were getting permanently injured from vocal stress that was happening on certain types of games. I'm sure you can all envision what those are. And then safety on set for our stunt performers and performers that do on-camera and motion capture work, and transparency, because as you all know, and I'm sure, all of you benefit from it, everyone has signed an NDA. When our performers are negotiating to be the leading role in a big franchise game, often they wouldn't have a clue. They wouldn't have a clue they were reprising their role. Or how big the character would be, or what would be asked of them in the booth. And so transparency became a big issue. And so those were the main sticking points, and particularly the residual contingent compensation became what we internally refer to as a religious belief. That is a model that just did not exist in this industry previously, and we were trying to introduce for the first time. The 11 companies we were negotiating against, some of them were very familiar to us in Disney and Warner Brothers, and some of them, EA Activision, view themselves as tech companies rather than entertainment companies, even though this is the biggest entertainment division in the entire world. And so those were really the fronts that we were fighting on. Luckily, it came to a close actually a year and 3 days ago, looking at my calendar. We really made improvements in all of these areas, both within the contract. We got a new, it doesn't look like our normal residual structure, but we do have additional compensation provided to our members on, bigger titles that are more than just, 10 or fewer sessions. And then outside of the contract, we really have made vast improvements with the vocal stress just through education and outreach that's happened during the strike. We now have the companies that were struck against being part of panels with us, advocating for safety of performers' voices and bringing, doctors that we've introduced them to in-house for their own educational seminars to educate their entire staff that interacts with our members so that they understand how to help protect our members. And, there's a real level of understanding now about vocal stress that was, only achieved through the strike and through things outside of the contract that are just normal organizing education things that the unions can provide as well.
And this was, I think, I saw mentioned somewhere that this was the longest strike in the union's history.
I believe so. I think it might be one of the longest in entertainment union history.
And
Not something we brag about, but it was a very, very difficult time. But
right, but I think that challenge that you mentioned of like bringing in this idea of residual payments, or this is a foreign concept to this industry, and was that like part of the discussion? Like this is not like your typical negotiation because you're trying to introduce this entirely new concept. I think, I certainly saw comments like among game developers that was the point that seemed most surprising. Like, oh, voice actors, like they just come in at the end of a project. We work the whole time, like we don't see any residuals from, our development of the game. I was just wondering if you could comment on that perspective.
yeah, it was certainly something that was really important to our members to introduce in some way, because unlike our other agreements, these franchises are making as much as the Marvel movies, are making as much as, blockbuster tentpole hits that we all go to see in the summer. Some of these games are the equivalent, and so our members really felt like they wanted to share in that success. And so that was really important to them to fight for. But there was also a real understanding from our members who are very savvy business people and very passionate about this industry. A lot of the members that work in games only work in games because they just love it so much and have found their little niche in the world that they're very, very passionate about. And so there was understanding about this being a weird new concept, but they were willing to fight for it. And eventually they got something that, both sides were comfortable with, that they did feel like participating in the successive games. And, one of the pieces that, as I was saying, some successes come outside of the contract. We also saw a lot of those comments about game developers and other employees of video game companies, with that exact comment that, well, why not us? And why do you guys get it and we wouldn't? We have always felt, and, just this conversation happening alone is an example of us wanting everyone to share in the success of this industry, and not just us. And, it's interesting, 2 years ago was my first ever GDC, and I almost felt like I had to walk around like covering my badge because, the strike was still, we were kind of right in the middle of it. People didn't want to talk about it. It was whispered in a couple sessions that, panels that we attended, but people kind of wanted to stay away from us. And then you look a year later, and I'm really proud of the fact that we helped to start more of a conversation about workers' rights in general within this industry. And there was so much conversation and so much positivity about fair working conditions and fair pay this past GDC and just people's reception to SAG-AFTRA and the other unions and organizations that are talking about it, whether it's the players, the devs, whoever. I think all of it is a positive conversation.
Great. And yeah, you mentioned also somewhere in there that idea of like doing it for the passion of it, which is something that comes up a lot in games and the game industry. I think we'll talk about that more later. But I think that this really was sort of a consciousness raiser, if not a hackles raiser in some quarters of the games industry.
All the things.
So turning to Steve, I was hoping you could tell us just basically like tell us about what you do, what your role is, and what ANSI is, and how it functions, and also if I'm totally mispronouncing it, which just shows how little familiarity we all have with unions. I can't even say the name right.
We call it the IA. IATSE, it doesn't really kind of come off the tongue very well. So,
it sounds like Yahtzee to me, so it sounds like fun. But.
Right, or other terrible things. So,
all right, the IA.
Right, the IA. So to try and hit your questions in order, we represent, the IA is the International Alliance of Theatrical and Stage Employees, and in the motion picture and television world, as well as the other crafts we represent. It's a lot of what we call the below-the-line workers, which are anyone behind the scenes or anyone behind the curtain, or especially those who kind of help to make things happen, as opposed to our brothers and sisters in the entertainment industry who are maybe a little more well known. We're the ones that work to bring the set to life and then give it to the other crafts in order to make it happen. What I do, I came, as I mentioned, I came from the visual effects industry. I joined the Animation Guild in Los Angeles to help bring union to the visual effects industry. From there, I was able to expand into organizing animation, and the International took a greater interest in visual effects organizing across the U.S. and Canada, so hired me on directly, and through that, I've been able to engage with animation artists in New York and in LA and in Vancouver, as well as stop motion across the country. I had some dealings with the games industry in Los Angeles. It was, our direct overlap would be the development community, as well as the visual effects artist community. And there were some studios in Los Angeles that I had worked with and begun efforts in. And from there, they were the ones who turned me on to the GDC event. I attended on a whim because it was one of those, hey, you really should go. I didn't expect to have another union in the room, and to see how the Game Workers Unite really kind of packed the room and held a conversation that, as Katie said, there was a lot of awareness of the need to form a union and band together and improve working conditions that I think was certainly spurred on by the actors' strike. My day-to-day is just that, outreach and travel and try and do that in the fields that I touch.
So you mentioned that you had started conversations with studios. That means opening negotiations or potentially unionizing VFX artists at game studios, or?
Correct. There's some in Los Angeles that I reached out to directly, but not so much the studio directly as much as the developers.
People at the studio.
There's been a lot of overlap in the animation and visual effects industry into games. So I feel that a lot of the work I've done has kind of helped pave the way for those conversations in the games industry, at least locally, to start taking place. And so when I had outreach from games, it was from folks that I had spoken to at visual effects studios in the West Los Angeles area that had then moved to, say, some of the smaller independents or even some of the bigger ones in Orange County. There was a lot of movement from the traditional animation studios into some of the Irvine studios that have expanded greatly. So
does IA currently cover or work with game developers in any capacity, or that's still an area that you're kind of trying to expand to?
Absolutely. I would say that the biggest connection we have is through my dealings with Game Workers Unite. I was fortunate enough to meet some of the early founders at GDC, and through there have been able to travel to Chicago and Toronto and Vancouver and New York. Actually, not New York. It's the first time I'm meeting Mohindi. But in some of the other cities, and being able to at least start to establish the concept and the building blocks of what unionization is and what a unionizing process would be for the games industry. There's a lot of work to do, and this is a huge step in just getting those steps laid down. And it's fascinating to see Game Workers Unite having formed as quickly and as broadly as they did. There's a real strong effort to see change made, and I'm hoping to be a part of it.
Great, thank you. I wanted to move on to Justin now to continue that conversation about how you start a push or how you start talking to workers in an industry or at a company or at a location, because you've been involved in a whole lot of organizing efforts. So how does that work? And talk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of similarities in other industries in many years past in terms of what it takes right now. But there's also a lot of really exciting new digital tools, which you guys know way better than I do, that facilitate communication in a horizontal way that allows people to come together in ways that when I first began as an organizer were not possible. We used to go house visiting when we wanted to speak to people in a particular industry. And so the sort of classic scenario was you would go on a house visit blitz for a weekend in some random place in Mississippi or North Carolina and try to talk to everybody before Monday, when the boss would find out that people were talking about a union, and inoculate and talk to people about the fact that forming a union is about building collective power for yourselves with an institution that helps facilitate that. And so that's how we used to do it back then. A lot of unions actually still do it that way because nothing beats face-to-face one-on-one communication when it comes to trying to build a union, because building a union is about listening and learning issues and helping people develop a process to fight back against what it is that is mostly, causing issues or problems for them. And so, but we also now have these digital tools, and over the last few years, we've been able through digital platforms to have a lot more conversations a lot quicker. And perhaps this is part of the Game Workers Unite, and being able to organize horizontally is helping facilitate union building in a way that's really, really very exciting. And I think is something that will hopefully help folks who are interested in organizing in this industry realize the potential of a union. And so, just the basic building blocks of a union are that the ideas of what it is that you get in a union contract or what you're fighting for in your union come from the collective. And so you all are working to identify common issues and common tactics and strategies to improve upon things. And so whether it's long working hours at different companies, and maybe some particular companies are worse than others. In our reality TV industry, we've had an industry-wide campaign there for quite some time that has been able to address overtime issues and overtime violations. There are still, knock on wood, some laws that are to be followed related to how many hours somebody is supposed to work. There is still some laws related to, how people are treated in terms of given breaks. There's laws around misclassification related to 1099 and W-2. All these laws that are out there, accessing them collectively is a way to actually make change around them. But ultimately, it's about building an organization. And so what that organization looks like doesn't come from a template. It doesn't come from just coming up with, this is how unions looked in 1985 or 1936 or 1999. So therefore, this is the union. This is how you form a union. We're union staff, or I'm union staff at least, and it's not up for me to decide what a union would look like in your industry. It's up for you all as a collective, and it's up to us as staff to help facilitate a process and use the resources of the institutions we work for to help expand your power within the industry. Because as you all know better than I do, these are multi-billion-dollar industry here, and the fact that people's salaries don't reflect that and the working conditions don't reflect that is one of the things that I assume people really want to address. And how to best address that is certainly, we have lots of experience and members and folks that will help that process, but it ultimately comes down to you all coming together and working to make those improvements. And it doesn't happen overnight, and I'm sure, we'll get into some of that, but there is a template and a process for building collective power. And I would say that right now you have more tools at your disposal to do that than at any time that I know of. And what we've seen in the digital media industry, where we have built several unions, is that it works and it's doable, but it certainly requires the people that work in the industry to make it happen.
So, Submit has gone through this process very recently with Fox Media and other media companies simultaneously that we're sort of organizing together. Can you take us through what happened there and what were the issues that kind of drove this?
Sure. Let me just really quick definitions. I work for Polygon, which is a part of Vox Media, so Vox with a V, and Vox.com is one of the sites alongside Polygon. I think a lot of people often conflate Vox.com and Vox Media, but anyway, the organizing effort at Vox started around, I think, last summer. I didn't get involved until the fall, actually around a year ago. And I was brought in and ended up being on the organizing committee, and then I'm now on the bargaining committee. And the main thing was that we had seen some kind of a groundswell forming in the digital media industry, largely led by the WGAE, with places like Gizmodo Media Group and Vice and now Thrillist. Places like that, and I think the folks at Vox really saw an opportunity because we're one of the larger bargaining units. I think ours is around 350 or somewhere between there and 400 because we have 7 or 8 different sites. And when you have a group that big, you can really kind of set the table. And that's what we're hoping to do with the contract that we eventually agree on. Is certainly there are forebears, HuffPost, and as I was saying, GMG and things like that. But for us, it was about not only kind of raising the bar across the digital media industry, but also maybe addressing some specific concerns at Vox around issues like diversity in the workplace. And or overtime and things like that. As people said, it is a slow process. We started bargaining in April, and we're not at the economics point yet, but we've got sessions coming up, and I think we're lucky in that the company has been operating in good faith the whole time. There are some other places where management is really vehemently anti-union, or they and so that they kind of depress union activity in the first place, or organizing activity at all. Then there's some other places where you have kind of management is like maybe they recognize the unit or are forced into it after an LRB election. But they're kind of fighting the whole way. We're lucky that Vox has been pretty good on that front, but that's another thing to sort of be aware of is that it really is about the collective action, and it helps to have everybody kind of work together.
So, as both a journalist who has recently undergone this unionizing effort and a games journalist, you're sort of in a position to see both worlds. What has this changed how you think about or how you cover labor discussions or discussions of unionization in the game industry, and you sort of like, have advice or like, hey, come, like we did it, come join us.
I think, certainly there are a lot of similarities in that, well, for any, workers in any industry, obviously the people who are the laborers, right, that, they are kind of they have the least power if they're not organized. And so that's true in media, it's true in game development, it's true anywhere. But kind of a particular similarity between the two industries, I think, is kind of how volatile they are. Obviously, we're seeing that. It's been a rough September in the game industry, but it's been a rough, 25 years in the media industry. Since sort of the internet really upended things. So what we've seen is that you have a lot of kind of people at the top who are have all the power, and there's a lot of consolidation across the industry, so I think at least at Polygon, I don't want to speak for kind of our newsroom management because I'm kind of in a different role right now. I'm not exactly in the news team, but we have a reputation of maybe being a haven for SJWs. I like for us, I think the sort of rank and file folks who are doing the reporting, the Vox Union, even if they're not involved, I'm the only representative on the bargaining committee. They have a heightened awareness, I think, of unionizing. Even me, before I got involved, I was pretty ignorant of unions. When I was first asked to get involved, I was kind of honestly skeptical. But I think it's only natural that we have this, awareness of what's happening at Vox, and really it's been eye-opening to see kind of the ways in which we can improve our own lot here, and then think about what that could mean for game developers.
Great. So Mohini's been patiently waiting. So you were involved with the action at the GDC Roundtable, which I think is really a flashpoint for Game Workers Unite, which, it should be said, is not a union. You said it's sometimes mistaken for one. But can you tell us about what GWU is and how it operates?
Certainly. So I guess for us, the biggest inspiration really was the work that the Screen Actors Guild folks did and the voice actors strike. It really kind of hit home because online there were a lot of conversations similar to what was mentioned before about, why didn't we have the same benefits that y'all are asking for? And we really took that as a point to build momentum to start talking about, well, we can too, right? It doesn't need to just be one group. We should take encouragement from their success and the struggles that they've been doing to kind of build our own momentum and our own capacity. So GWU, it's been a great ride, honestly, but we really didn't expect things to get this big this fast. And it's been really great because we have amazing allies like Steve, who's been working more closely with some of my colleagues on the West Coast, and who've been helping us kind of understand what we can do with the visibility we got after the GDC action. So GWU started off with a series of angry tweets, which is, I guess, common in the games industry. And we knew that there was this roundtable happening at GDC, and it sounded like the position that roundtable took was not particularly pro-union, and it was kind of rehashing a lot of these sentiments about how union just doesn't work for the games industry, that we're just so different, that old models just don't work for us. And we were really frustrated by that, honestly, and it was a few of us, and this list started growing, and it got to be, we reached the limit of Twitter's DM group limit, and so we started this informal Discord channel, and everyone was just really upset about it, and well, we decided why should we just be mad in silence. We should just do something about it. I wasn't present at GDC this year because I was teaching at Syracuse and it was in the middle of my term. But I was part of the zines that we developed that some of you may have seen at GDC. They were surprisingly popular, which we did not expect. But it was great to just see the discontent shared across political lines, across ideological lines. A lot of people came together really, really fast to self-organize, self-fund the production of this direct action. Stickers were made, zines were done, zines were stitched, colored, black and white, a bunch of different things were done in, well, less than a week. And just seeing the support we had after GDC was really great, and we managed to get our website up and just put all the resources we've done as soon as we could up on and just try to get the most out of this momentum we built. So I would say we've just been kind of going with it and sort of trying not to get too caught up with everyone's reservations and concerns and try to figure out what is the best way forward for us in the games industry. So in terms of our position, the reason I guess a lot of people think we're a union is because I think people want a solution. They want someone to tell them what is the way forward. Honestly, so do we. The answer is...
That's why I asked you all here.
And I feel like a lot of our struggle has just been with counteracting these narratives about how a union is bad for creativity, a union thwarts passion, a union is not good for our Wild West style of production and development, which allows us to kind of flourish. And pushing back against those ideas and talking about how there's different kinds of unions, unions that go for different sorts of groups. And which is why we see ourselves as an advocacy group. We're working with other more experienced union folks and union organizers to understand what model works best for what kind of organization. We want to be able to provide support to help workers in their own organization self-organize and make something that works for them. If it's a contractual union that you negotiate with the owners, that's great. If it's a solidarity style union, that's great too. Let's just build and support each other and be seen by each other in our spread out decentralized industry.
Yeah, so the question about different models or what does the union look like is a big question that I wanted to get into today. I will solve it here in the room today, but just to sort of understand what is on the table or what are the questions that we need to be asking when we talk about what we're even trying to strive for or what might make sense. One question is, would it be a game developers union or it's called an industrial union, or are we talking about different unions for different specialties, like one for VFX artists, one for designers, one for programmers, by discipline, and yeah, so this is kind of open for everybody. You operate in different. Also, there's also the idea of guilds, which are, I believe, for independent contractors and not employees of a company. So I'm just wondering if we can get some clarification about where does one model work for what industry, or what are the pros and cons of either being all together or having it by discipline.
I'm happy to go first. With regards to how we handle organizing in different parts of the entertainment industry, I feel that the IA has, specifically here in Los Angeles, split representation amongst what we call locals. And the locals tend to be craft specific. In Los Angeles, that's pretty unique. Across the country, we have, for example, in New York, we'll have one local that becomes what we call a studio mechanics local that handles most of the work behind the scenes, while in Los Angeles we have 13 locals that will split that up. How I see that in games really depends on the metropolitan area and the type of and the numbers you're talking about in order to properly represent the crafts. I feel that games certainly deserves its own agreement. That agreement needs to address how the industry treats those working in it. So if we're covering devs, if we're covering visual effects artists, if we're covering, the games writers, if we're covering all of those, whether it's, how those, to take how those folks are currently being treated and ask them, how do you want to be treated differently? One of the things that most of the entertainment unions do very well for their members is provide working conditions and benefits that are fairly ubiquitous across the scope of the industry. So specifically, the IA handles a benefits fund that deals with health and pension across the United States. So that if you're working short of the coasts, which is a different plan, but if you're working within the contiguous 48, you're in the same health plan no matter which project you work on. So that if you leave one project and go on to another, that health plan remains the same. That pension plan remains the same. The introduction of a defined benefit or a retirement account type of pension in the games industry, I think would be very, very important. Now, naturally, it took a lot of time to build these, and I think that at first we would have to work towards getting them included. Secondly, one of the parallels that we have is that they're, in an environment where you're not employed for 50 weeks out of the year at the same employer, having a benefit structure in place that keeps in mind that there will be extended periods of hiatus or extended times when you're not working and still able to be a part of those benefit plans. So I know that, within the IA, we have two different health plans, both of which address these in different ways, but still allow folks to work, let's say, in Los Angeles, strictly working on commercials, which are 6 to 8 week turnarounds. You could be working multiple in the course of a year and still take time off, or still have to take time off because of the way the industry is structured, and never fall out of the health plan. Short of that, I think that, is there, within the confines of the IA, which is where I'm most comfortable speaking, would there be a local, in each city? Absolutely. That's the way we're structured. Is that necessary? No. If there's a national structure that handles it, much like, my brothers and sisters in the Writers Guild or in SAG-AFTRA, that would be up to those who want representation to decide. There are advantages and disadvantages to both.
So yeah, to sort of follow up on that question, so if rather than forming something entirely new, a company or a group of people in one particular discipline were to organize under the umbrella of the IA or a larger organization, how does that work? Because and I think this is also unique to the U.S. that a union is just per company. So when one shop organizes, then that doesn't have anything to do with the company right across the street. So it's like you go company by company. Is that sort of a factor of like which established union sort of help get them off the ground and then incorporates that as a local, or how does that work?
I can address how we've dealt with that at the Writers Guild, and I think it's similar in other unions. Is you have an industry-wide campaign, and you look at the entire industry, as daunting as that may be, and the goal is to organize the entire industry and not organize just one shop. And sometimes because of restrictive labor law, in terms of getting union recognition, which is what you need to do collective bargaining, as a matter of law, you may organize a particular company, but the campaign itself is structured in a way that looks at the entire industry. And so in our work in digital media, it's been very much about trying to establish industry standards at particular companies, but throughout the industry, so that ultimately, even if a place doesn't have a collective bargaining agreement, the norm will be that people are paid X. The norm will be that people get health care. The norm will be that, there's diversity committees. The norm will be that there's editorial independence. And so trying to establish those norms on an industry-wide basis, I think would be essential. The little bit I know about this industry would be absolutely essential to be thinking about, which I think, folks that have been thinking about this are thinking about it that way. And not being confined or constrained by just thinking about organizing within the law completely. And what I mean by that is thinking through a kind of all of the above strategy, at least in the beginning, And are there issues that you can tackle collectively without it being through the National Labor Relations Act or without it being through a formal union mechanism? Are there issues that affect everybody, no matter what company you're at, that people would be willing to take some action on? So whether it's doing some surveys or doing some petitions or days of action in particular cities or across the country, the idea is getting and building momentum and collective power. And sort of which bucket you end up fitting in at the end, this is sort of not me wearing my Writers Guild hat, but me wearing my labor organizer hat. Don't get bogged down in that. Start building power like you all are doing and talking to each other and supporting each other, and you'll sort of figure out which union, which local, and how that works. And then one last thing I'll say is that at Vice, we had a 3-union effort with IA and SAG-AFTRA, where we all worked together to look at what the different job titles were, because as you guys know, job titles are changing, duties are changing, and sometimes when we organize a place, there's as many job titles as there are people at the place, right? So trying to figure that out can be a real challenge. But the thing that worked particularly well there is that we had 3 labor unions putting resources and effort and time and solidarity behind the effort of a wide range of workers with a wide range of titles, and that was a decent model. But I think what you have something that's a lot more complex, obviously, with multiple employers. But it's been figured out in the entertainment industry, right? There's multiple employees there. There's freelance arrangements, and folks that are working in film and television, for the most part, with the exception of reality TV, have unions and have benefits. And that came through struggle and collective action.
Right. So that's one of the things we wanted to hear about, like that these complexities that we see in the game industry, have they been reflected in other entertainment and other media, or are they so unique to games? Like, how are they solved? So that the question of job titles is one of them. The same person can even do the same thing at different companies, and they call it something entirely different. So even though what you do doesn't change, maybe you're a narrative designer here, and you're a games writer there, and you're just a games designer there. Games are a very new medium, and in a sense, because of the way that technology advances, and because of the drive not just to innovate content, but to innovate form and mechanics and sort of everything about a game. Almost every company reinvents the wheel from the ground up, to mix some metaphors there. So to some extent, would negotiating these agreements and defining the terms of certain types of jobs and what happens also involve basically standardizing them for the industry, which seems like maybe a larger project, or kind of one of the major obstacles to why this hasn't happened yet?
I would say, just going back to what Justin said, I think that, drilling down into the, should we call it this or should we call it that on a job definition level is something that should be considered, but I think that overall if you think of it, as he said, where, because Game Workers Unite has been able to bring a level of conversation across the industry, and truly, this is the first time one can say that, where, here in Los Angeles, if the effort had started, it may not have been able to reach New York or get this kind of level of support in New York without, Discord or without the communication that they've had before. I think that on a global scale, having those discussions on how should we deal with those who write for games versus those who dev for games versus those who, paint and draw for games. I think, you start with those building blocks. Within the confines of a collective agreement, you can have job definitions, and you can hold employers to those, but even that is a catch-22 and has an Achilles heel. So you need to really be careful with how, let's not think about, let's tack them down to this, or let's hold their feet to the fire here, as much as in the industry as a whole, on a global scale, where are our efforts going to be? Where do we need to see the biggest amount of change? Where are they going to fight the most versus where do we need to make our stand? And then, get everyone moving in that direction. And whether it's petitions or surveys, and then doing the ground level organizing. When you have chapters like, or cities that are more active, which, then you start to identify where your supporters are, and then you start to do, because of the laws of the land, where it is, one of these things where, there is a studio that has to be signed. And once that initial contract comes into place, then you'll really see the ripple effect start to happen where, if it happened in LA, it can happen in Chicago, it can happen in Austin, and it can happen in New York.
And I'll just speak to the SAG model. I think, building blocks is a good term, kind of buckets is a good term. Even as old as some of our traditional contracts and some of our longest contracts are television, there are titles that the industry uses that are used on set that people get credits for, different types of guest stars and multi-episode arcs and featured extras, and none of those words exist in any of our contracts. And that's fine as long as, and I've discovered in going to more of these tech and video game conferences, y'all like to call yourselves super weird things, and everybody is like in a creativity game to see what they can name their title, which is rad. But there are kind of unique, unifying trends to certain types of roles, and I think those are easily put into buckets that you can put whatever you want on your card, but when you get your contract and you're agreeing to the terms of your employment, do you go into one of these 5 boxes? And that's how you'll be treated and paid.
Cool. And to raise another one of the I think challenging factors, it's often cited as a reason that game developers might have had trouble like improving working conditions or keeping wages high. This idea that it's kind of like there's a certain cachet, it's a desirable career, like all the kids these days, they want to grow up and be game developers, and now we have all these schools that teach game development, and there's kind of like, game dev careers tend to be very short. You go in, you churn, you burn out pretty quickly, but then there's, tons of new grads and people who want to break in who are just ready to come in and take your place. Does that present unique challenges to these organizing efforts? And maybe similarly related to that, the sort of virtual nature of a lot of game production means that workers might be able to be replaced easily by people remote in another location, or by like outsourcing or offshoring like entire production teams. If like what do you think is a good response to that, and have other industries faced similar problems, or are games in kind of like a uniquely difficult position?
I would say that, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, Steve, please go ahead.
I would say that, again, in the animation industry, one of the things we've seen is just that you have, we have teams who work here in Los Angeles who then, on essentially a pre-production model, where then the work is shipped to Canada to take advantage of a tax incentive where the actual animation work is done and then it's returned. That we still see that those folks in non-union studios in Los Angeles in animation, want the better conditions, want the participation in the health plan, and want to be able to say, well, I'm sorry, it's after 40 hours, so I get my overtime. I think that that overall you're going to see with as more companies become more comfortable with having multiple offices in multiple cities across the globe, that the advantage of being able to come at it at this stage and say, we are looking to build a relationship with you, Mr. Games employer, who brings us to this location in this city, and values us enough to keep this here, that we will not only address your needs as an employer and that there's budget constraints and whatnot, but that because you find us valuable, there's leverage in that, and that means that we want to be able to rest properly. The way I describe it to folks I speak with in my small meetings is that the human animal really needs 3 things. It needs to rest, it needs to eat, and it needs to frolic. And if you don't allow those things to happen, you're hurting the animal, which therefore hurts your product. So we want to address that with you. You're not letting us rest, you're not letting us get nourished, and you're not letting us go be other than game developers. And I think that if a company then says, fine, I'm going to go to this end of the globe to do that, the industry is big enough and that the need for the product is big enough that something is going to take its place and that those developers with that skill will continue to work, if not for that employer, then another. I don't think that you're going to find the entirety of the games industry float to a part of the globe that allows employers to be bad. That certainly, if that was possible, they would be there now and they wouldn't come back, and you would only have a certain amount of games. But to your point, you have Warner Brothers and you have EA and you have Disney and you have these large conglomerates now that are employing people across the globe to develop product to sell to my children and me and the rest of the population. And those you will remain employed, much as they will tell you that you won't.
Great. So I have many more questions that I would love to ask you, but we got a kind of late start here, so I want to turn it over to the roundtable pretty soon. But first, do we have any questions from the live stream that we can take? No? Okay. I guess that means that everybody in the room will get a crack at you next. So I'm going to be ending the stream now, but thank you for tuning in and for bearing with us with technical difficulties. We will probably make a recording available later. But yeah, goodbye to everyone in Streamland.
Hi, streaming people.